Welcome everyone to the NCOSS Post-Budget Breakfast 2025. Thank you to NCOSS for hosting this event, to our guests and to all of you in the room who braved this horrendous weather to be here this morning, and to those of you online for not braving the weather. My name is Alexandra Smith and I'll be your host for this morning. Cara Varian, the NCOSS CEO, will share some introductory remarks shortly. But to commence proceedings, I invite Melissa Stubbings to welcome us to country.
Warami, Midiga, Naigiara, Melissa Stubbings, Burrabrongal, Wamali, Darug Nura, Budru Nadunya Darug Nurawa. Welcome friends, I'm Melissa Stubbings of the Burrabrongal and Wamali nations of the Darug Nation. And it's good to see you all here on Darug land. And I welcome you all here as we gather on the lands of the Darug Nation. I pay my respects to my elders, past, present, and emerging senior members who are or have worked hard to continue to teach our culture. The Darug Nation extends to the city and harbour, to Darkinjung and Guringai nations in the north, to Dharawal Nation in the south, and to Wiradjuri and Gundungurra nations in the west. It encompasses all the land, waterways and skies in between. You may have heard me mention that I'm Burrabrongal and Wamali, and you're probably thinking this is Gadigal, right? Yeah? Who's thinking that? You're pretty honest, right? Yeah, good on you, because I'm going to explain that. So as Darug people, there has been an understanding that went back for many generations to our elders that as Darug people we can do welcomes on Darug Nation, being from any of the clans. But further, as we look into our history and the effects of colonisation, what I know is that I'm from Burrabrongal and Wamali, but prior to colonisation I was probably from every clan of the Darug Nation, right, with marriages. Yeah, so we don't really know all that history. So we're acknowledging that we are from Darug Nation and this is Darug Nation that we're on. And that's what's the important part of that welcome. So I hope that answers that for you. So it is Gadigal land, yes, of the Darug Nation. It is the clan of the Darug Nation. So I hope that covers that for you, because I don't like leaving people with questions in their minds. So this is the land, the Nura, of my ancestors and family who have cared and lived on this land for over 65,000 years and continue to do so today. As Darug people, we've never given, sold or treated our rights to our land, skies or waterways to anyone. The Darug Nation has approximately 29 clans across the areas I mentioned, and the Darug Dalang, that's the word for language, is re-emerging as my family members work hard to bring it back to life, using the knowledge of elders, written material from the early colonisers and linguists. Some are now fluent speakers, and if you've been active on social media, you may have seen a new app that came up called Bayala, which is a Darug language app which has been launched. It's spelled Bayala, and you can now start learning Darug from that app, which is really exciting. And it was launched, yes, woohoo! And it was launched last week at the week before, at Marana Aboriginal Community Association, where I am the very proud manager. We had our launch with federal member Susan Templeman present, and we're very excited by the launch. So Darug people, we share our culture, knowledge and understanding of land with those who have true intentions and the understanding of greater issues facing Aboriginal communities and a good faith to improve those conditions for our communities. A welcome to country is a way to introduce a part of our 65,000-year-old culture into the broader identity by teaching those in attendance about our deeply personal relationship with Nura. If you remember, that's country or land. Nura is a concept loosely translated into country or land. However, it is more than a word easily translated. It is a connection, it is a belonging, it is our DNA running into Nura. To be welcomed onto country is a privilege that says, I welcome you here as we gather. I welcome you here that you come to this occasion with good faith and a kindness in your heart. And I welcome you here with the understanding that my welcome exists for you to be honourable on my land, the land of my ancestors and family. A welcome to country is a moment where we share our deep ancient custom and show proudly the value we have for that custom. We welcome you to say we see you on this Nura, the Nura of our ancestors, and we acknowledge and honour your connection to this sacred Nura. What we ask is that you respect our ancestors' traditions and culture. We ask you to tread lightly on our Nura, which is sacred to us, and remain mostly untouched for thousands of years. And for this we wish you well, and we see you on our land, and we offer you the protection of our ancestors. For Darug people, caring for our land is not a chore or work. It is an honour and a privilege to care for the mother. We call the mother Wayanka, that's the earth, our mother. As she cares for us, she provides food, shelter, water, she nurtures us. That's not what I was going to say. What I was going to do is I always like to give a bit of a language lesson because we've been talking about language. So some of you who may have seen me up here before or seen me at another event, I do like to teach some language. So some of you may have learnt some Darug language before. Who knows some? Anybody? Yes, some hands up. That's great. There's a few. The reason that we teach this language, our language, is because we want you to use it. We want you to learn it because the only way that it comes back, the only way that we have true connection and understanding, and language is one of those that gives us that true understanding and connections. We want you to have it. And so today, my gift to you is my language, the language of my ancestors and people. So I'm going to teach you how to count to 10. You've all learnt to count to 10 probably before you went to school. So you're going to have another lesson now. It's really hard, so you have to pay attention. It's not. It has 3 words. And this is the simplicity of our culture. We didn't need a lot. We just needed 3 words to count to 10. So let's go there. The first number is 1, right? So waggle. Can you say waggle? Waggle, that's 1. A bulla, that is 2. Can you say bulla? Bulla. Bulla. Now it gets technical. So to say 3, it is bulla waggle. So can you say bulla waggle? Good job. Now, some of you are probably very smart and jumping ahead, right? So you probably already know how to say 4. Yeah? Bulla, bulla. Good, I heard it down here. Yes, bulla, bulla. Say bulla, bulla. Now 4. Now, don't get too far ahead because there is a word for 5. Okay. You can do bulla, bulla, waggle. You probably jumped to that. But the word that we use, the third word, is damara. Can you say damara? Damara. Good job. So that is 5. Now we have to go to 6. So it is damara waggle. Now you can do bulla, bulla, bulla. Yes, the kids love to do that because they get to say more and it sounds really, bulla, bulla, bulla. They love it. And then we go to 7, which is damara bulla. Yeah, really hard. I want to hear more people say that. Damara bulla. Damara bulla. Good job. Now you get to put all 3 together because we're going to go to number 8. So it is damara bulla waggle. Let's do it. Damara bulla waggle. Good job. Well done. And then number 9 is damara bulla bulla. Damara bulla bulla. Good job. And now number 10. So the smart ones in the room already there, right? Damara, damara. Give yourselves a clap. Well done. Well done. You've learnt some Darug language today and I want you to take that with you. I can share this with NCOSS so they can share it with you if you want those numbers. So you can teach your family, your children, grandchildren. If you work in childcare or centres with children, please teach them, particularly if they're on Darug land. If they're not on Darug land, you may want to learn the language of the land that you're on and teach that language to those children and to anybody. But to finish, I'm going to share my poem that my good friend Brendan Moore taught me, and I really like this poem, so I share it lots. And you're going to repeat after me 5 lines, and then I'll kind of go like this to say that I've stopped the poem. Oh, breaking everything. Okay, from the mountaintops where the trees grow, where the snow melts and the rivers flow, where the sky kisses the ground, and the ground hugs the sea. We would love to acknowledge we're on Darrignura. Won't break this mics this time. I'm going to finish with teaching you two more words. Didrigora, which means thank you. Didrigora wasn't a word that we actually had. It was a word that we had to create. And one of our wonderful elders who we lost last weekend was a part of that creation, because we didn't have words like thank you and please, because we didn't have the politeness in our language. We were quite blunt, actually, apparently. We were very just said what we had to say. But we created this word because the people were asking for it. They were like, what's the word for thank you? So we don't have a word for please, so don't ask. But we have thank you. And because of that reciprocal part of our culture, we didn't have to have those words. That's why. It was an obligation to each other when you lived in a clan society. So Didrigora is thank you. And the last one, which is very blunt, which is Yanu, which means I'm out of here, I'm gone, finished.
I'd now like to introduce Cara Varian to give some introductory remarks. Before I do that, however, I would like to just give a few housekeeping rules. If you need to exit, there are exit signs over there. The Parliament staff will tell you, of course, how to do that if we need to. The bathrooms are just outside the room, just outside where the registration desk is. Now, last week's budget was described by commentators as safe indeed, Treasurer, and by myself, as safe and considered. There was a focus on housing as well as a significant investment in child protection. However, while the investments were welcomed by the sector, NCOSS highlighted that it failed to deliver critical investments in social infrastructure to support the state's most vulnerable communities. So that takes us to our theme for today, working together towards a fairer future. Communities across New South Wales face immense challenges and change, from climate disasters, wealth inequality, and declining public trust in institutions. An effective response will draw on local strengths and require collaboration between government, the social sector, and local communities. How do we do that? What does this budget tell us about the government's desire to help the most vulnerable? And how can the government and community services work together towards a fairer future? To explore these questions, we will first hear from the Treasurer as he outlines the government's budget priorities. I will then facilitate a discussion so that we can pull apart the budget and really understand what it means. And following that, we will hear from a panel of public service and community leaders. Unfortunately, Michael Coutts-Trotter is unwell, so he'll be replaced by Cara Varian on the panel today. Cara, could I invite you to the stage?
It's a big day today. Thanks for braving the weather to be here. I know it's breakfast, but I'm going to raise my glass to the Treasurer and the Shadow Treasurer and say thank you for being here today. I want to also say a few thanks to Melissa for your acknowledgement of country, to Minister Kate Washington and Secretary Tidball for being here, and to Hester, our event sponsor. People in this room matter deeply to the work of the social service sector and to our state, so thank you for being here. When you speak to this room, Shadow Treasurer and Treasurer, you are speaking to the leaders, members and friends of NCOSS's vast network. We are community service organisations from every corner of this state. Some of them couldn't get on planes today, but they join us online. We represent the diversity of the sector, from social housing providers to domestic violence services, from children and family services to food pantries, to First Nations-led health organisations to community hubs, and together we are the glue that holds New South Wales together. You will notice that my glass is half full. This budget follows a historic commitment, 5-year funding for our services, and that's a game changer. It will mean less time chasing paperwork and more time delivering on our mission. It is a real productivity measure, and I look forward to working through its implementation over the coming months. I also welcome the investment in child protection announced as part of last week's budget. Our members working in this area know firsthand the human impact of an under-resourced system. Yes, there are tough conversations ahead about how these services will be delivered, but we stand ready to engage with the shared determination of putting the interests of children first. I also acknowledge the ongoing efforts towards workers' compensation reform. Changing access to support is never easy, but there are clear issues around psychosocial claims that must be addressed. Alongside scheme changes, we also must strengthen the mental health and wellbeing supports in our community, and that is where our sector stands ready to partner with government. And finally, I would like to acknowledge today's announcement of 3.5% indexation to increase funding to reflect the rising costs of delivering essential social services for communities across New South Wales. Reliable, sustained indexation is vital to ensure social service organisations can continue to support the people and communities in need. You would have noticed that my glass is also half empty, so we're going to go there. The reality is that in this budget, we were not successful in securing the investment in social infrastructure that we believe New South Wales needs. We made the case for targeted funding in areas that would yield long-term dividends. Building on the critical investment that was made at last year's budget to provide further targeted investment in social and affordable housing. More resources for community legal centres to clear the backlogs and meet growing community demand. Support for our neighbourhood centres so they could be full-time resources to make our communities safer, happier and more inclusive. An increased investment in harm prevention and early intervention from children and young people, families, domestic violence and mental health. We also advocated for funding for the long overdue introduction of portable long service leave. It's an excellent initiative and a significant step forward that will over time be self-sustaining. But in the here and now, the additional costs of this scheme to the social sector employees has not been funded, and it will drain about $84 million per year from service delivery. As partners with the New South Wales Government, our strength is a shared one. We know prevention is more than just desirable, it's also more affordable than dealing with the consequences of poverty, exclusion, trauma and neglect. So what would it take to fill the glass? To the Treasurer and the Shadow Treasurer, I extend an invitation to both of you to spend time with NCOSS members over the next 12 months, to see the work that they do day in and day out, supporting people in their time of vulnerability and empowering them to find their pathway to thrive. For your respective parties, it's your job to keep track of the bottom line. Let us demonstrate to you how investment in our services builds thriving communities and improves the New South Wales economy far more in the long term. We think there is the case for two acts of leadership. First, to invest in our organisations to build community resilience, prepare for disasters like the one happening today, and prevent harm to give every person in New South Wales a chance to thrive. Second, to work with us to develop the business case for our sector to deliver these critical services. Our state is changing. Rising costs of housing and lower rental affordability continue unabated. Aboriginal children are being both removed from their families and exposed to the criminal legal system at greater rates. Healthcare in rural and regional areas access is becoming harder. School attendance rates are dropping. Mental ill health and loneliness is growing. Waged and unwaged people are not able to cover life's essentials and are relying on our services more and more. NCOSS is currently part of 2 recovery committees recovering from disasters that have happened this year, 2 regional health and wellbeing recovery committees, and I expect there will be a 3rd. While our society and our environment changes, so must we. The status quo will not serve the sector or the government, but most importantly, the people of New South Wales. Social infrastructure will be key to meeting the needs of our communities. So when we return next year, let's be in a social infrastructure auction where bipartisan support empowers our members to make New South Wales better, fairer and a more inclusive state.
Thank you, Cara. We must remind ourselves that all government decisions are about the people of New South Wales, many of whom are struggling right now and struggling to see how the government is supporting them. This now brings me to the Treasurer, the Honourable Daniel Mookhey, MLC, as he outlines the key priorities in last week's state budget and how it meets the needs of the community.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Alex, for hosting this morning, as well as for your insightful commentary as always. I think you labelled me New South Wales' most boring man last week, as well. Can I also just take this opportunity to acknowledge Melissa and for your very welcome and generous welcome to country, and for teaching us some of the Dara language as well. I recall you doing it last year too. And it's great to hear again. I can't say I'm getting any better as well. And I'm sure you can. Just teach me how to say no. And of course, Kate. And again, it takes immense courage to stand in front of a room of hundreds of people and tell your story. And you've done so with such grace and such dignity. And you've asked me to look into a program called Love Bites. I will confess I do not know about that one. I have not heard about that one, but I'm very happy to look into it and to see what we can do as a response to your call to action. Can I also acknowledge John Robertson, one of our state's leading citizens, as well, for your leadership of NCOSS, your leadership of Food Bank, your leadership of iCare as well. And Cara, as well, thank you very much for the power of your advocacy when you agree and when you disagree as well. And it's deeply respected. I acknowledge also the presence of my shadow, Damien Tudehope, who's in the room as well. I'm looking forward to our annual tete-a-tete in front of the NCOSS community as well. And thank you also very much for the work that you're doing. It is always a pleasure to join this event. This is actually my fourth NCOSS post-budget breakfast, my third as Treasurer as well. And I do make a point of wanting to come every year to account for what decisions we made, what went well, what did not go well, and also because you don't complete the work of social progress in any one budget. And my view has always been that in each budget you strive to make progress. And I want to acknowledge as well that in delivering the third of the Minns Labor government's fourth budgets in this parliamentary term, that we have made progress, but we also have more progress to make. And I'm looking forward to talking about that as we go through this morning. But I do want to start with some exciting news as well, that for the third time in a row, we will pass on $122 million of additional funding to fund a 3.5% rise in wages for the tens of thousands of community service workers who work in your sector. This means that crisis accommodation workers, counsellors, social workers, youth workers and legal officers working in community organisations under New South Wales Government's contracts will all get the pay rise that they deserve. And I know that in this particular room as well, I should acknowledge the strong advocacy of the Australian Services Union as well, that for many, many years has been pointing out that we need to have an industrial relations system that recognises the special role of community service workers and particularly acknowledges the fact that if we are serious about closing the gender pay gap, we need an industrial relations system that is capable of recognising gender inequity. And whilst it is true that the Fair Work Act adopted those changes some years ago, last week the New South Wales Parliament enacted laws here at our state level for the state industrial relations system to also now recognise gender equity and gender equality as an objective of the New South Wales industrial relations system. And that was a change that, again, lots of people in this room and in the union movement have been campaigning for a long time. So it's very pleasing to say that we passed that into law last week. We did that on a bipartisan basis, and that's an important change for particularly the New South Wales Public Service and the New South Wales local government sector as well, and does build on the work that's happened at a national level led by NCOSS, your national equivalent, as well as the ASU. So congratulations on that too. The decisions to provide additional funding in our first three budgets does mean that a typical community service worker is $202.22 better off per week. But importantly, that is money that has not had to be sourced from your existing budgets. And we have passed that on for the third time in a row to ensure that at a time where your organisation's under immense pressure as we ask you to do more, but equally as your workers are dealing with a once-in-a-generation cost of living crisis, that we are rebuilding their purchasing power too. And that is something that we are very pleased to do. That investment that we made and that we announced this morning is in addition to some of the other announcements we made in the budget as well last week. And I want to start by talking about one of the big ones, which is the $1.2 billion child protection package, the single biggest increase in child protection funding in New South Wales history. And that is a 20% increase in the foster care allowance, which is worth an extra $176 per fortnight for a typical carer. I was astounded to learn in the course of developing work with Minister Washington and Secretary Tidball this policy, astounded to learn that that foster care allowance has not increased in real terms since 2006. And in fact, it has not increased in real terms since it was introduced. And so we're very pleased to have delivered a 20% increase for the foster care allowance. There is also a $1 billion extra for out-of-home care services, and as Cara mentioned, a precursor to some of the conversations that I know the sector will be having with the DCJ later in the year. Well, there is funding to build 44 new purpose-built homes to get vulnerable children out of hotels and motels as well. I should just say, I've been talking about this particular reform and this particular challenge at the NCOSS breakfast now for 2 years in a row. And I did make it clear at the time that if we found ourselves in a situation where we could get reform and particularly deal with the high-cost emergency accommodation component, which everyone agreed we could all do a better job on, I made it very clear that every dollar we saved from that would be returned. Not a single dollar would go back into the con fund. Every single dollar from reform goes back to the sector, and we've delivered that. And I should say that that is an important principle going forward, and for me to be clear to the sector as well, that from our perspective, we aren't seeking to make budget savings out of these changes. We are seeking to deliver better outcomes for our kids and better services for the people of New South Wales. And I want to thank the sector and NCOSS and others, because this has not been an easy reform. This has been a reform that has required quite a lot of engagement, quite a lot of conversation. And there is still more to do, and there's still a lot more conversations to be had. But the point being that we can do a better job. And clearly what we've been wanting to do in this budget is to demonstrate that we will look to make the big, historic, transformational investments when we can. I made the reflection last week when I had the opportunity to join the Minister in talking to some of the foster carers, that we say no to a lot, and we will have to continue to say no for a lot. But we say no to a lot in order to say yes to the stuff that makes a big difference. And we're really pleased that in the $1.2 billion child protection package, we were able to do so. I should say as well that that additional $1.2 billion is then paired with still record high levels of investment in social, affordable housing. And last year, I was here to announce a $5.1 billion investment for 8,400 additional social homes, with half reserved for the victim survivors of family and domestic violence. I should say that we are on track in rolling out that money, and that money continues as well. In fact, on Monday, the Minister for Housing announced that already we've brought back online 1,400 additional social homes. And that is a huge achievement, given that in the previous decade, on net terms, we went backwards by 353. We have a lot more work to do to keep it going. We have a lot more work to do, as Kate's pointed out, to make sure that this level of service delivery continues. But the fact that in this budget, again, we are maintaining record levels of investment in social and affordable housing is there to drive the construction of more homes. But we're also upfront that the next phase of dealing with the housing crisis is to get more homes built. And we need to build more homes. We need to build more social homes. We need to build more affordable homes. We need to build more homes for essential workers. We need to build more homes for people to buy. We need to build more homes for people to rent. And that is not going to go away as a challenge for both sides of politics and a challenge for our state. And as we continue to make decisions in this term of Parliament, and as we gear up for a choice at the next election as to what we are going to do to solve the housing crisis, it should be clear that New South Wales needs more homes and we have to get them built. And we've got more work to do later in this year to get a planning system that is capable of approving them, assessing them, deciding them and getting them through quicker. And we also have a lot more work to do as a parliament in making sure that a lot of the changes and the progress we have made in recent years is not contingent on who happens to be in power at time, but is written into law. And that is an issue that we are looking forward to engaging with the Parliament on as we go forward. Cara has made mention also of the fact that in this budget, we are establishing 5-year contracts for the sector, which is a huge step forward. I recall as a humble upper house backbencher and being spoken about, as I was doing, in fact, my first inquiry, which was in the out-of-home care protection system in 2016, and being spoken about then about what the challenges are of 12-month contracts for this sector. How we ask people to do the most complex forms of social intervention, but say we can only provide you sanity for the next 12 months. And in fact, once you sign your contract, you have to start work on the next one the very next day. And I've been listening to a lot of people who've been talking to me for years about what that means for your resourcing, the fact that you have to keep staff set aside to do nothing other than to continue to apply for the money that you already have. And equally, what that means for your workforce, the fact that you can't offer people permanent employment and that you have to keep your staff in a state of precarity as well. And I ask them to take a lot more risk that is otherwise avoidable. And what's worse is that often you will just get the same contracts on the exact same terms. And this is something which we've been working on for years. And I'm very, very pleased that, again, under the leadership of the Minister, the Secretary, but also the sector, that we've been able to provide the funding pathway and for 5-year contracts. And frankly, it's a win-win for you and for us. I've made the point that I want to make sure that DCJ and the Secretary should take notes on this. We should not be spending as much time simply tick the box exercises on whether or not you should get the same funding you already have. We should have the capacity to give you certainty, but also therefore to free up our resources to redirect them to more forms of intervention. That does mean that over time, this system will expose who is perhaps performing at a higher level and who perhaps can improve. And we will need to work through what that means in order to ensure that we are continuing to deliver resources to the issues that are most likely to make an impact. But compared to where we were, that is a good problem to have. That is a good problem to have. And the fact that we're now introducing these 5-year contracts is an important step forward. Now, I do hope that we will soon get to a position in which if you're accredited, be it the Department of Health or Department of DCJ, you are cross-recognised across all. And I know that there is further work to do to ensure that one department will recognise your credential with another as well. But again, I say that this is progress. Now, I know that in the course of the conversations we're about to have, we'll talk about the portable long service leave issue, and we should talk about the financing and whether or not that's fair, and I well and truly respect the fact that NCOSS has a different view to the government on this question. But we should also just recognise it's a very good thing that people in the community service sector get portable leave, and that your work in one organisation is now recognised in another, which allows people to build careers. And that's an important step forward as well. And I do want to pay tribute to the people who have been campaigning for this, which has been cross-sector, again, from an employer and employee perspective, to get this change up. And it commenced yesterday. And again, happy financial new year for everyone, by the way. But I should say, again, a sign of how we are determined to make sure that your sector is resilient and it is responsive, but also we are providing you with enough certainty for you to then look after your workforce who are doing some of the toughest work we are we have to do as a state. This budget, again, the third of our fourth, you can call it boring, I call it progress. We always have more work to do, but I very much thank you once more for not just your engagement today, but your engagement since we gave the last one. And for those, as I always say, for those who we disappointed in this particular budget, work's already begun on the next. Looking forward to engaging with you as we develop Budget 4. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you, Treasurer. We will delve into some of those issues soon on the panel, but I'd like to now introduce the Shadow Treasurer, the Honourable Damien Tudehope, MLC, as he outlines the opposition's perspectives on the state budget.
Thanks, Alex. It's always good to be in this room because generally it's not the audience that I speak in front of. However, I come here and I enjoy the interactions, and I certainly enjoyed Kate's presentation and join with the Treasurer in acknowledging that to give an address, a personal address like that in front of this sort of audience would not be an easy task. I thank the Treasurer for his presentation and all of you for being here, because on a day like today it is difficult. One of the things the Treasurer does is he speaks for a long time. It just means that there are no opportunities for you to ask him questions, because he'll look at his clock shortly and say, "Oh, guess what? It's 9 o'clock. I've got to go." I'm sure he will stay around. But one of the things that he always criticises me for in the Parliament is that when I give an address in response to budget, I generally start with a character analysis of the Treasurer. And he didn't disappoint this year. I was able to give him his usual character analysis. One of the things, though, I would say that in this room is that I would be surprised if the people in this room were not disappointed with the budget. The Treasurer's, I suppose, epitomisation, or the way that he characterises the budget, is a poles and pipes budget. And by doing so, he articulates a position that we are, in fact, seeking to put in place the infrastructure to support housing development, infrastructure to support new initiatives within the community by way of infrastructure. But what I would say to the Treasurer is that there is social infrastructure which needs to be put in place at the same time as poles and pipes. And if you neglect the social infrastructure which you provide, the people in this room provide, then in those circumstances you are in fact neglecting a important component of building communities. And one thing I'd like just to emphasise and highlight in relation to where this budget is going, and that is the failure to fund community legal support services. That in fact is a serious failing for government to wind back in circumstances where they have increased support for legal aid, but to wind back community legal support funding is an important resource for communities to have for the purposes of ensuring access to services, knowing where to go at times when they need it most. The other things which I could highlight would be cost of living support measures. This is a budget which is short on cost of living support measures. One thing that I do note, for example, is the Energy Accounts Payment Assistance Scheme. The take-up rate of those payments is really, really low in terms of its take-up rate, and yet in the circumstances there is not enough done either to promote it or to enhance those sort of schemes going forward. So cost of living schemes are an important component of circumstances where we find ourselves in a cost of living crisis. And I have to say that in a budget where we have masses of increases in revenue, whether it's stamp duty revenue, whether it's payroll tax revenue, whether it's land tax revenue or gambling revenue, you would have thought that in those circumstances there could have been a much greater emphasis on delivering community services. I think that's the thing that I've got to stop. There's a message that just came up here. However, the Treasurer did come today and he did make a very important announcement. I think there's nothing better than a breakfast to get an important announcement from the Treasurer. And in fact, I'm sure he came to breakfast this morning and said, what can I say? And I do say that I welcome the $122 million, which the Treasurer has announced this morning. I'm going to ask him later where did he get it from, because it's not in the budget, or I can't see it in the budget. Maybe it is there, but it's an important question for him to answer, because $122 million, because if he is taking it out of grants and subsidies, you've got to ask yourself, well, is he reducing other things to pay for the $122 million? Because if it's already, there are things that are already allocated in the budget, so I'd suggest to the Treasurer that he do tell us that. One of the things that I also welcome is the child protection announcement that I made in the budget. I think that the increase in funding for foster carers is something which is really important. Out-of-home care services are also an important initiative. Can I just say, in closing, one thing? We need these services, but there is a fundamental question that precedes that announcement. Why do we need those services, and are we doing enough to ensure that children are not in need of out-of-home care? Are we doing enough in the preventative space, all of which is often provided by people in this room? And do we fund the preventative as well as the effects of failures in our society? So I think that's a discussion we need to have, because if we don't want kids in out-of-home care, there's a fundamental things that have got to be done in relation to prevention of those things that put them there. And lastly, I would say is that I, again, and I did it last year, I call on the government to do something about gambling reform. This is a government that, and certainly when we were in government and going into the election, we promised cashless gaming as a component of the policy direction that we would take. There is never a tragedy worse for families than gambling addictions, and the manner in which that plays out and impacts on families, and often in the services that people in this room provide. The government, unfortunately, has significant reservations about going down the path of reform in gambling, and I will keep calling it out every time I'm invited to one of these breakfasts, but it is something which needs to be done and the government needs to commit to. So thank you for having me here this morning, and I look forward to participating with Alex.
Treasurer? Thank you. Okay, thank you both. Now, I've known you both a long time, so I can say this. We're not in the upper house now with long-winded sparring speeches, so I'd like to get to as many questions from the floor if we can. So if we can keep questions brief, I know that is hard for both of you, and I say that because I've known you both for so long.
Questions or the answers?
Answers, sorry.
Right.
Answers. My questions will be brief. And I'd like your answers to be the same. But I do appreciate you being here, and I'm looking forward to this panel. I guess I'll start with you first, Treasurer. Governments are often criticised for funding crisis response over prevention and early intervention. What advice would you give to the sector for making their case for more upfront investment in social infrastructure?
Well, firstly, the sector has already responded in that in the last 2 years I've spoken about the fact that we were dealing with the crisis component of the out-of-home care system. The sector responded pretty magnificently. We're now in a position where we can now return the savings into better investment, including prevention as well. But I think that pattern is just going to have to continue, which is, yep, governments have to deal with crises of all types. Yep, we're dealing with quite a lot. Mr. Tudehope's government had to deal with a lot. But if you don't reform, there's an opportunity cost. And we have mentioned that workers' compensation is a classic of the genre. We have to get a better system there. That will then free up the capacity for us to just use public money better. That's a good example. But equally, I would just simply say to the sector, what we need to do now that we have, particularly the introduction of 5 year contracts, is we need to be putting in place a good system to assist what works, what doesn't work, what can be done better, but also how do we switch best practice? And how, if someone's doing something really well, how do we make sure everybody else knows about it and can adopt it? And I think that's what the next phase of social infrastructure reform looks like. And I think that we now have that platform in which we can start those conversations, which incidentally will equip the sector with a lot better case for the investment side and the prevention side of the intervention cycle.
Mr. Tudehope?
Well, I think the Treasurer is no doubt right that budgets are all about prioritising, and you've got to identify those things that you need to fund, and often reform will deliver more funding for opportunities for different programs to be put in place. However, I do go back to the point that I made when I spoke earlier, is that we do need prevention as the focus of crisis. But there are all sorts of other things where we have crisis. We have resilience hubs which we need to put in place in circumstances where we do. And I think you, Alex, or someone made reference to the fact that we look like having a potential another climate-related event potentially today. The manner in which we deal with communities across the state in circumstances where they face very serious issues in their own communities is something that is always at front and centre for governments.
What would your advice be to the sector, though? How do they really advocate for reform and not just response to a crisis that may change in between budgets? We saw that in the last budget where the crisis was very much around domestic violence.
Yeah, well, I do say that the government did, in fact, there's significant funding again in this budget for domestic violence, and the government's approach to funding has been an approach which identifies specific issues which need addressing. I think in the previous government, we had a much more broad approach to funding. And in fact, if my analysis is right, is there has been a decrease in funding for grants and programs under this government. However, an increase in specific funding for identifiable issues which they want to address. However, it means that the government is, in one sense, picking winners and losers in relation to the way that they address issues, because they are specifically designed to approach the issue of the day. Our model was a different model by making sure that there was funding for across the sector generally.
Thank you. I'd like to just throw to the floor now for some questions, and I think we have some people walking around with microphones. Thank you.
Thank you. I was hanging in there so I could get my question. I'm hoping this will be a really easy answer for you, Treasurer, because we've been leading down this path. I'm Susan Watson, the CEO for FAMS. We're the New South Wales peak body that represents the child protection NGO, early intervention and prevention sector. While the government has just made significant investment into out-of-home care, of course, there has been no corresponding investment in the part of the system that keeps children from entering out-of-home care in the first place. In handing down this budget, you spoke of how this government is focused on the future of families. Our sector is highly specialised, skilled and impactful. Our approach is to work with children and families before they hit crisis, supporting them through their challenges and not defining them by their circumstances. The recent DCJ-funded TEI evaluation tells us that our sector lowers the likelihood of children entering out-of-home care. Despite this, we haven't seen core funding increase for over a decade. Mr. Treasurer, our sector is treading water. When will this government invest in what works so that more children can stay safely at home with their families and fewer end up in out-of-home care?
Well, firstly, I thank you for the work that you do and your members do, and I also thank you for your advocacy. But I also am not going to hide the fact that we have had to deal with a out-of-home care protection system that was not sustainable and had to be reformed. And I made the point in the budget speech that when we came to power, we had 105 children sleeping in motels, and they were looked after by labour hire firms. They were unaccredited. And I make no apologies for the fact that the first part of the government's response to that, under the leadership of the Minister and the Secretary, has been to deal with that part. And I make very clear that unless that part of the system's response was stabilised, the capacity to begin assessing proposals and others was not possible. And so we've made progress. Does that extinguish the possibility of further progress? No. Does that extinguish the capacity now to look at other ideas that could make a difference? Absolutely not. But we all have to acknowledge that system wasn't working, and that opportunity cost of that system was absolutely extinguishing any treasurer's capacity to respond to your call to action. So now that we have put forward that response, we have a platform, the platform is more stable, we have the opportunity to consider whether more progress is possible.
Treasurer, isn't that, though, just, can I ask, a response to a crisis situation in some ways?
Yes, but we had it, and we shouldn't underplay the severity of it. And I have to say, if you happen to be one of those 100 children, it makes a huge difference. But this was a problem that was known. This was a problem that was known to the sector and the government from 2019 onwards. It wasn't dealt with. We came to power, we had to deal with it. That's our job, that's what we've done. And you're quite right to say that is the crisis part of the intervention. But unless it's solved, it does extinguish the capacity for broader reform and for additional reform. And I should just say, with out-of-home care protection, that's just one example. We have been dealing with quite a few of them when it comes to that, when it comes particularly to the social services sector interventions. And we have more work to do. As well, because of course the need for reform continues, and as the sector has made clear, the demand is going up. So we're not at all, no one is declaring mission accomplished. But I'm also making the point that more change will need to be happening, and we are going to need to work with the sector on it, but we start now from a much more stable platform than when I appeared here last year.
Could I just take another question from the floor?
Hi, thank you. Julie Perkins, I'm a CEO from a First Nations organisation in Grafton on the North Coast. Firstly, thank you, Melissa, and I'd like to acknowledge, just out of respect, all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the room here today, or those online, and my ASU comrades led by Angus and Narelle. Thank you very much, Treasurer. There was a number of measures in the budget for Close the Gap. I'd just like to say that for myself personally, I'm not a fan of Close the Gap as a term, and the reason being, sometimes I think the gap is just too far for First Nations people. But in saying that, there's still a lot more work to be done. And I think that the Treasurer's own Indigenous Expenditure Report states such. So I think my question is basically, look, thank you for what you have allocated. How will you continue to truly support self-determination and maybe timeframes to ensure that First Nations peoples are still not the most impoverished peoples in our own country? And secondly, I'll just finish by saying, Mr. Treasurer, if you could just look, please, on the Treasurer and on the Premier's own website that talks about local decision making. It talks about accountability mechanisms across the state. That is in shambles. And the reasons that we get on the ground is that whether it's myth or fact, Treasury is at fault. So I'll just leave you with that. Thank you.
Well, the other fact, firstly, thank you. I will pass on the feedback to Treasury. they do play a role as the designated foreperson for the New South Wales government often as well. But the secondly is that, yes, in this budget we did increase funding for Close the Gap initiatives. And to be fair, that nomenclature is what it's been called as well for a very long time. And the second, that additional funding on Close the Gap initiatives is significant. It is more than $200 million of additional funding provided to Close the Gap. The reason why, though, is because that does reflect the partnership that we have with the Council of Aboriginal Peak Organisations as well, and the fact that they do provide a leadership role in that. And in this particular budget, we did roll out First Nations budget principles and started to test them on a wider set in liaison and in partnership with CAPO as well. And of course, we respect the fact that CAPO is an organisation that obviously under the national agreement we work with, but I'll leave it to, and we very much value our partnership with them. I should also then move to the sort of, I guess, to address the third point, which is where do we go next with it, and particularly with Treasury. Yes, we published the First Nations expenditure report. We're really proud to have done that. We are looking now at whether or not the next budget we extend the First Nation budget framework to more of the budget. And I should also just make this point. This is the first budget in which we applied gender impact assessments over all proposals over $10 million. And those two forms of policies are working with each other, and that's important. And incidentally, as much as critical as people are of the New South Wales Treasury in many respects, New South Wales Treasury is leading a lot of the nation's work in how to evaluate. And in fact, particularly First Nations impact. And that is something that we do report to National Cabinet on, and we do as Treasurer, I take very seriously as well. Final point that I do want to make, and I think I've made to NCOSS's leadership as well, we would be really interested in the sector's view about how the Victorian social impact valuation framework works and whether that's a good lesson or not. We've heard a lot about it, not 100% convinced that it's 100% transferable to what New South Wales's context is, but it's fair to say that when it becomes particularly to the 10-year investment cycle, the Victorian Treasury has interesting lessons about how to test social interventions, how to fund them, and then how to evaluate them, and then how to provide a longer funding cycle on them. So we'd be very interested in talking with you, your organisation, and lots of other members in this room who've had experience with that framework to see whether there's lessons that we can pick up methodologically at New South Wales Treasury and learn those lessons too.
Thanks, Treasurer. We have a question from online that I think Ben McElhine's going to ask for us.
Work. There we go. Thank you. Good morning. This is a question from Kate DeCosta at Wesley Mission and picks up on a comment from the opposition spokesperson. Where in the budget are the costs and harms of gambling accounted for? In Victoria, the costs are 5.7 times tax revenue. What are they in New South Wales?
Yeah, well, we don't use the budget papers to provide that level of detail. But I should say in this particular budget, we did introduce performance and wellbeing budgeting for the first time in New South Wales as well. But I pick up the point, the government's prime response to that is through the cashless gaming trial and the report as well, which is obviously being considered by the government separate from the budget process.
Is the government still committed to cashless gaming? The Premier has made some comments recently that suggest you may be prepared to move away from that, which I think someone like Mr Tudehope would be nervous to hear.
Yeah, I mean, look, when the government will respond to the report, and when the government responds to the report, it's fair to say that, again, the panel and that has been evaluating it did reach different views. The government's processing that, and then when the government when it responds to the report, will obviously make clear what its view is about the next phase of reform.
Why don't you outline the harm of gambling? I mean, I don't remember seeing it in that new framework that you talk about.
Well, I mean, to be fair, budget papers generally are not the vehicle in which governments describe that level of detail. We have lots of other evaluation frameworks in which that is made known. I'm actually not sure that the Victorian budget papers say that, but I'll go look at the Victorian budget papers as well, because I'm not aware that those jurisdictions use their budget papers for that purpose either as well.
It's a separate report from the Victorian government.
Yeah, it's a separate report. It's not reported through the budget papers. And so I just make the point, budget papers are generally about budgets.
Mr Tudehope, just before, unfortunately, we have to wrap up this panel, do you have any, because I know gambling reform's close to your heart.
Well, not much more than what I previously said. The government did this trial, which had very limited response very early on in its term, I think there is manifest opportunity for the government now to actually act in this area rather than, in fact, continue to vacillate about whether it will or it won't embrace cashless gaming.
Thank you both. I would really love to continue this discussion. As you know, I like to question you both regularly, but unfortunately we're out of time. So thank you.
This is the only panel which we agree on. We do every year together. But thank you very much, Alex, for convening it, and thanks for the organisations for having it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And please join me with thanking both the Treasurer and the Shadow Treasurer. We will now move on to the panel, where we have the opportunity to hear from leaders from across government, academia and the sector. As they make their way to the stage, I'll introduce them to you. First, we have Cara Varian. Cara is well known to the sector as the Chief Executive Officer of NCOSS. She is a strong advocate for equity, opportunity and dignity for all. Cara has worked across the not-for-profit, public service, political and corporate sectors, including all three levels of government. Next, we have Giancarlo de Vera. Giancarlo is the CEO of Being Mental Health Consumers, the peak body for people with lived experience of psychosocial disability. Giancarlo is a proud queer, non-binary leader with over 2 decades of experience across public policy, advocacy, social services and international human rights. Third, we have Dr. Kate Harrison Brennan. Dr. Kate Harrison Brennan is the Director of the Sydney Policy Lab. As the former Head of Policy and Design at the Paul Ramsay Foundation, Kate has seen the impact of good policy and partnerships that can have on breaking cycles of disadvantage. Kate has an extensive career across government, philanthropy and international affairs. Finally, we have Di Kapera. Di is the State Director of Mission Australia's Community Services across New South Wales and the ACT. Di has extensive experience working across both the government and non-government sectors, influencing policy and reform programs in areas including homelessness, housing, Aboriginal affairs and reconciliation. Please welcome our panel. That's okay, no problem. I just have to share the microphone. I might just start with you, Cara, a question to you. The New South Wales Government launched its inaugural Performance and Wellbeing Framework with this budget. We heard the Treasurer mention it in his speech and on his panel. As the peak body advocating for the social service sector, what opportunities do you see for the sector in this new framework?
As most of you know, we were expecting Michael Coutts-Trotter today. He sends his apologies because he's very unwell, but we do have some of his colleagues in the room, and the reason why I wanted to have him here, the Secretary of the Treasury, is because with this wellbeing framework, we have for the first time the government talking about people and not just numbers and infrastructure. And if the government is focusing on wellbeing as part of the way that they're assessing performance, I think it will naturally lead to looking at wellbeing from a longer term perspective, and that then really kind of naturally falls to the strengths of the social service sector, looking at harm prevention and early intervention, and knowing the deep connections that organisations as part of NCOSS have with the community and where we can support that. So I think that's the really important kind of step here, that we've got seen this for the first time, and this gives us a way of engaging with both the Treasury and other agencies around how we demonstrate that value of that work in a way that governments can understand and kind of evaluate.
Now, I might put this question both to you, Kate, and to you, Giancarlo. First of all, Kate, the Sydney Policy Lab has explored citizen-led policy development to understand how it could lead to greater outcomes. What lessons are there for how the government should be partnering with communities to address the challenges we face? And then I guess to you, why should the government care, and how should they do it? First to you, Kate.
Well,
ultimately budgets are about priorities, and that needs to really closely reflect what actually matters to people. And so the University of Sydney's Policy Lab is a community-centred one. We see our role as part of the university's social infrastructure, actually supporting communities to experience what it's like when you reconcile quite different interests, people who may not be able to normally express that they hold a different view from one another. And that's central to the mission of a university, is to help people think differently and disagree well. So what we've done at the Sydney Policy Lab through things like people's assemblies on care at Westmead and Broken Hill, where we have clinical schools, through care labs, and our current work on after school care has been to support communities to really express those differences, to deliberate over them, to provide expertise from the university that's academic, in conjunction with that lived expertise, to explore what could be done to really solve some of these keenly felt issues. I think it provides a solution for government to think through how to work with anchor institutions like schools and universities to support people to express what matters to them, that then can be reflected in state budgets.
Giancarlo, what's your take?
Thanks, Alex. First, I just want to acknowledge lived experience, particularly Kate's lived experience. Thank you for sharing your story, particularly given how much mental health impacted your life. Sorry, I've got a bit of a hay fever. As Cara said, like with the framework, the budget's about people, but as Kate just said, it's also about priorities. And I think really what's missing and why we should care is why government should care is that lived experience is the connection between the people and the priorities. If we talk about that, if you think about that, like we know the why through our lived experience, and because we know the why, we know the what and the how. And I think that's sometimes a disconnect between outcomes and priorities, and outputs and announceables. Government loves announceables, don't get me wrong, and they're great, but sometimes there's a disconnect between the logic between an outcome and an output. And for me, that is so incredibly important that lived experience is part of that logic. And it's so funny that the budget was released the same day that the interim report was released by the Productivity Commission. For those who don't know, it was released last week, and it was an interim report on the agreement on mental health and suicide prevention. They said the agreement was not fit for purpose because lived experience was not embedded enough in, and they called for shared decision making, and they called for co-design of the next agreement. So that leads me to the how. The how, I've got to build on Cara's, 2 leadership acts when I'm in your introductory remarks. The first has to be, I'm going to add a third one actually, Cara, shared leadership. We are users of the systems, aren't we? And we deliver the services as well. And so how can we? So we need to call for shared leadership in this in how we match the outputs with the outcomes, and that requires mechanisms. You shared some mechanisms. People's assemblies is one. God, if I have to sit another advisory committee, perhaps not the best one. But let's think about how we can evolve, think differently. And I want to show a quick story. People don't know this, but 2020, do people remember that? The 2020 Summit, Kevin Rudd? I was part of that, and that's where the NDIS was actually born. And that was a really good example of a mechanism that got people thinking about how to do things differently. Sure, you can put aside what you think about how that summit went, but I've seen from that history to where we are now with the NDIS, and co-design has not been there through the 15 years, well more actually, 13 years since the 2020 summit. And so that requires us to have real power when it comes to shared decision making. And so I think that for me has to come down to, as I said earlier, connecting outputs with outcomes, but also how we spend the money. I mean that in 2 ways. Like what we spend the money on, obviously, but as the Treasurer said, how do we evaluate that money? Like how do we evaluate how that money is being spent? It's really important that lived experience is part of that evaluation so we can get the right interventions in place to prevent.
A question for you, Di. In the lead up to the budget, NCOSS described the sector as being in an existential crisis. What do you think the risk to the government is if this isn't addressed?
Thanks, Alex. Look, I think we should start by saying that the delivery of these services is most definitely a partnership piece. And so I want to point out that in many ways, these people are the helpers in the sector. We are the ones delivering in crisis on a regular basis. So we know crisis well. Many of these organisations are delivering off the smell of an oily rag. And I will say that we do need to fund the delivery of the services for what it actually does cost. The government need to pay what it takes. And I think that if we go further in terms of some of the risks that were pointed out earlier today, portable long service leave is something that is good for government employees. It should be good enough for our sector as well. Similarly, we can't continue to fund the cost of continued increases in workers' compensation.
Just on the workers' compensation, I understand, I'm not sure if this is something you feel comfortable talking about, but there is criticism from the government that in their push to reform the system, it will leave some vulnerable workers, in a worse off position, and particularly women in those care industries.
We absolutely want to support our employees, there's no question there. I think it's about putting the right parameters in place so that we're not left holding the bag at the end of the day. It's not something that's sustainable to continue to fund the continued rising cost of workers' compensation. So it's simply about putting the right parameters in place to ensure the employees are supported first and foremost, but also that the right provisions are in place to ensure that we have the right decisions made to support our employees, but also support the workforces every day.
Thanks, Di. I'd love to throw to the floor now if we have any questions for any of our panellists.
Hi, thank you very much for having this meeting today. This is actually the first time I've ever paid to do advocacy. I don't belong to an organisation. I'm an individual, and I'm advocating because on the 20th of July 2023, my son got shot when he was having a psychotic episode in his Glebe Housing Commission. The police were called, the ambulance were called first, but the police arrived, gained entry, and within 8 seconds he was shot dead. So I've been trying to make a difference, and I'm linked with a lot of families who are also working towards this. I'm directing a lot of this towards you, sir, because I haven't actually engaged with your party yet. I want O to add mental health as a line. It needs money. The police do not want to do this. Sorry, I'm just like, this is hard. They don't want to do this, and there's no way they can pull out until the government fund workers with a living wage so they can take their place. I want affordable housing. Right now, as we speak, Glebe has got bulldozers in decimating one of the buildings, and where are those people going? The government, to my view, and the view of the people who I'm associated with now and who I also represent, want to be able to be funded by the coronial inquiries, because they have to wait 3 years, I'm still waiting, for an outcome to tell us that our children are dead. They don't have the funds to support the families, and in fact the police families don't have support either, because I've met with the head of the union twice now. It's very hard, it's almost like climbing Everest to get anything done. And it seems to us that the money that's being spent are on tradies, so they can build buildings, so they can get people out of Sydney, and that's all been spoken about. So I'm here, and I'll go everywhere. On Sunday, I turned 81. I've got 20 more years to go, and I'm still going to be here fighting to get money for the people, not for the buildings and for Mr. Min's television appearances. Thank you.
Are you okay? Oh, great. Giancarlo, would you like to speak to that a little?
We're very familiar with your story, and Being has supported the reforms around how police respond to mental health crises. there has been a lot of work by the LECC in trying to improve how mental health crises are dealt with, particularly at the point of who is going to intervene. We absolutely are aware of the conversations around needing to have 000 address, the need for more targeted connection to support at that point of crisis. But I do think there is other ways in which we can respond. The intervention point is the key. Who intervenes is key, and I do know that the government is working on who intervenes, and we're incredibly involved in how that is working. And I remain hopeful that that mental health crises will be dealt with better, because police shouldn't have a role, and we need peers to have a role in responding to mental health crises.
Are there any other questions from the floor at this point? Hi.
Thank you. I'm Brett Collins from Justice Action. There's a large group of people who aren't able to contribute to these sorts of conversations, which I think we should take into account. We talk about youth out of home care. Those children, when they really strike it hard, they go into the youth justice institutions. So there are over 200 at the moment who are inside those youth justice institutions. They don't have a voice. There's no one gives them a chance to actually talk. They unlike the adult prisoners, they don't have access to computers in their cells, no access to computer tablets, so their voices don't come out. Now, we were actually at a mental health roundtable for the Mental Health Commission on Friday, and at the commission we had the discussion. There were 9 people there. There was no representative of people who are actually inside the hospitals, inside the forensic hospital, inside youth justice. We were talking about them. There's no opportunity to actually have the lived experience of those people engaged. So do you support the idea of computer tablets going to the children who at the moment are costing $1 million a year, locked away every year, right, $1 million? Do you support those children to have access to computer tablets as adults have, and have a chance to have their voices and their actual living experience being expressed?
I'm not sure who that is best. Would you like to talk to that? Or?
Well, as I said earlier, I think there is absolutely a need for lived experience. It's young people. I've got a brother in the forensic system, so I understand, I guess, the pathway you've outlined. But one of the things that we don't see, as you said, is that lived experience isn't represented enough in these processes, and I agree with that. And I think, as to whether or not the question you put to me as to whether or not the computers should be something that I support, I'm happy to have a conversation but I do think there is a significant role and value in having young people in part of the conversation.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the floor? Oh, thank you.
This is going to take a lot of courage. I'm from the Northern Rivers, so I work for Northern Rivers Community Gateway, which is a big NGO. I'm the trauma counsellor there in that program, and I've got my colleague Kristin that works in the hub and ER, as well as providing electricity, EAP program as well. What I wanted to highlight is that the damage that was done in 2022, the floods in our area, I feel that the rest of the state has moved on, or the country, while they're still trying to rebuild. The face of homelessness has totally changed. And I think when we're talking about little things like addiction is addiction, whether it's gambling, alcohol and other drugs, it's self-medicating, and it's like this perpetuates, you're homeless, so you try to self-medicate to forget about it, unemployment's down, business have been destroyed, mental health has risen, domestic violence has just hit the roof. I just don't want us to be forgotten while other people are getting on with it. When I did come to work after the floods, it looked like a war zone. It was just unbearable. So when we're looking at little things, when I was looking at gambling, addiction is addiction, regardless whether it's gambling, alcohol and other drugs. And being a trauma counsellor, what's the underlying issue? Why are we drinking and gambling, and why are we hurting each other? If there isn't some embedded trauma that's, presenting. So for me, it's basically don't forget about the Northern Rivers that's still trying to recover. And unemployment's down, mental health is high, domestic violence has hit the roof. And that includes child sexual abuse.
Cara, I think maybe I'll go to you because I think this goes to the point that we've discussed a little bit on throughout this morning about the government being quite good at crisis management, whether it be, in an area like a domestic violence crisis or whether it's a natural disaster like the Northern Rivers experience. Does the government sometimes move on too quickly and forget and then leave it to the sector to pick up the pieces?
I've got a few comments on this. The first is that in kind of looking across the sector and the funding that's allocated for different types of services, my experience has been so far that the distribution of that funding and the service availability is largely a legacy. It's very, as far as I can see, it's very rarely tied to community need or population size. So I think as a principle, we should be improving that.
So do you mean it's sort of set and forget? Once it's established, they just stick to that template, if you like?
Yeah, a particular government at a particular time will create a program, and then the allocation of how much money is given to each district will just stay that way. And so, there's some perverse outcomes of that. We know that for some programs, there's greater funding in inner city Sydney than Western Sydney because that program was developed 20 years ago. The population growth in Western Sydney is vastly different now. So we need to have mechanisms in place to make those adjustments as demographics change, the environment changes, population size changes. There's another part of this which is about the way the social service sector role, but also the way that governments deal with natural disasters and emergency issues like flooding. There is an important role for communities to prepare in a person-centric way for disasters, which is not being done well enough at the moment in New South Wales or anywhere in Australia. And part of that is because for so long, natural disasters have been considered something that happens infrequently and largely around infrastructure. But there is an acknowledgement now that we need to have communities at the centre of that conversation, but not necessarily an understanding of how to do that. And so I think there's a role for the sector to educate government, but also make sure that we're getting that support to deliver those services. We have social service organisations, including yours, I'm sure, in the Northern Rivers that are being approached by the Reconstruction Authority to say, are you doing some preparedness? Because we're expecting you to do that, but we don't have the funding for it. We're waiting for that to come through the infrastructure funding of the DRF, for the Disaster Readiness Fund. And then the final thing is that we know that the recovery from natural disasters is a 2-year time limit. And that comes through the federal government largely, and that needs to be adjusted because people don't recover in that period of time, and certainly they can't even start on their process of recovery if they don't have a safe place to live. So there's three. I think there's three kind of components of what we need to do as a sector and as an advocacy organisation to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future.
Thanks, Cara. Just if there are any other questions from the floor, over there.
Thank you very much. I'm Robin Kelly. I'm with my colleague Fiona, and we're from Resilient Lismore. So I'd like to acknowledge also the beautiful land that we live on in the heart of the Bundjalung Nation, and our colleagues from the Community Gateway that have arrived down here with us. We believe, and I'm going to read this for us, that any sort of disaster recovery should be really played as an essential infrastructure funding body. It is imperative for community organisations like ourselves at Resilient Lismore to be heard. We have a living experience. We have documented and noted hundreds of stories of people that we have helped and worked with. We have supported workshops so people can enable themselves to be able to learn how to rebuild their own homes. We have helped 1,400 homes repair themselves. We've had hundreds and hundreds of volunteers. We've received funding from a whole core of different people, and we're trying our hardest, not only with our hearts and our hands, but with our professional attributes that we bring forward in disaster management to create planning for future disasters and empower the community to plan ahead. It's really important that disaster management is essential across New South Wales. We know it, we live it. We ask, as I said, with our hearts, that the government identifies how important PSEP planning, Red Cross planning, is for each individual, regardless. Helping each other, our neighbours, our local government areas beside us is imperative to support us. Thank you so much, NCOSS, for putting on the breakfast. We appreciate the support of so many people out here that we work with, not only as part of Resilient Lismore, but also as individuals. So thank you. Thank you.
I'll just check. Kate, was there anything that you wanted to add? I just think that might be something that the Policy Lab, particularly around your work in citizen-led policy development, I just wouldn't mind your thoughts before we wrap up.
Yes, I mean, I've been listening intently. Because we have a new project that's really exploring the nature of the university's responsibility to communities in the event of natural disasters. So we're just beginning to work with community in Camperdown and Westmead, and we're hoping to extend that, but very mindful of over-consultation. But thinking about how do we as an institution really serve local communities, make available the expertise within the university and support the expertise in communities to prepare for natural disasters and to activate the resources of the university in the event of natural disasters. So I've been listening and learning. I'm keen to engage more as we work with some of our clinical schools, including the one in Lismore. But I think that this is a real area, as Cara pointed to, of thinking through what does it mean for government to support communities in disaster preparedness. It's no longer about just the physical infrastructure. It's about how do you build social infrastructure that can, withstand, turbulence in an era of polycrisis. It's going to be natural disaster in a time of growing inequality and polarisation that can support communities to stay connected and to be able to weather what is now very normal events. So I'm looking forward to the university continuing to engage with communities and hope to with yours as well.
Thank you, panellists. I really do thank you for your contribution. And that brings us to the end of the NCOSS post-budget breakfast for 2025. Thank you to NCOSS for organising, and thanks to all of you for joining in a fantastic event. I think there is clearly a strong view in the room that the government and the community service sector need to work together as partners if we're to achieve a fairer New South Wales. We can see the desire, but it will require significant shift in how government operates and prioritises investment. Thank you again, and I'll now hand over to John Robertson, NCOSS President and CEO of Food Bank New South Wales, ACT, to wrap up the event.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming out in this terrible weather to be here. I'm sure you've got as much out of this as certainly I have, and I'm sure many of you in the audience appreciate the attendance of people like the Treasurer, the Shadow Treasurer, the Minister who only just departed. I want to also just acknowledge Kate for what you shared. It's no mean feat to stand up in front of an audience and share something so personal. But it's a very compelling part of your story's compelling in terms of why we need to act, why it's so important that everyone in this room does what we do every day. The one thing about today is I look back and I think I've now done 4 or 5 of these breakfasts as president of NCOSS, and that's been a real privilege. But I want to go back to the start because I recollect my first breakfast as president talking to a similar audience to this. And we were talking about funding, and we were talking about the fact that we do so much that we don't get funded for as a sector. And I think about how far we've come over that time, and it's very easy to get trapped into what we didn't get in the budget. But I think it's really important to look back and think about where we started, certainly from my time at least, and where we are today. Things like the fact that we've seen increased funding for child protection in the last budget, the fact that we have seen the increase and the certainty around 5-year contract funding. Those are things that couldn't have been achieved without advocacy of NCOSS and your support. And whilst there are still things that we would like in future budgets, and many of them have come forward today, I want to leave you with a bit of optimism and hope and talk about that 4 or 5 year journey and the fact that where we started and where we are, and that change takes time. The one thing I would say about these breakfasts is that they are well supported. The fact the Treasurer has been here as Shadow Treasurer and continues to come. The now Shadow Treasurer attends and speaks. And the fact that that both sides of politics are prepared to engage, that even the Treasurer acknowledges that, yep, there is more work to be done and that he wants to engage with this sector. I think we've come a long way from where we were, where this sector was seen as part of society that's always complaining without solutions. And I think our approach has changed significantly, that we are solutions focused, that we deal on the front line with people's lived experiences and we can share those. And the fact that the politicians now want to engage says that we have come a long way, and that gives us an opportunity to advance more. There are things like the impact of the portable long service leave on organisations. It's a great thing for our workforces. It's a great thing and something that has been advocated for a long time by the sector, by the ASU and others. The fact that at the moment the government says isn't going to be paid for me is, okay, well, we've just got to work harder to convince them of all the reasons why they need to do that. I don't think we should leave simply going, well, we didn't get everything we got. We never do. Budgets never give us all that we want. But the key thing I would say to you all today is that when you leave, think about the positives, think about the opportunities. And as Cara said at the outset, next year when we come back, we're on the downhill run to the next election. We want to be thinking about, they're going to be pitching for our support, both sides. You want that bidding auction, or you want them both saying, what a great thing, and they're bipartisan on, yes, we are going to fund the portable long service leave, or we are going to put money or more money into mental health services, or whatever those things might be. Think about the next 12 months and the campaigning. Thank you for the support that you've given to NCOSS. Thank you for your continued participation in the activities for the sector. This is a sector that does great work, and we should all feel very proud of the work that we do. And I know we've heard some people talk about the work they're doing in their communities. This is a sector that is critical for the way our society develops, evolves and gets better. And so thank you for your attendance. I also want to thank Alex, where is Alex, for emceeing today. I want to thank Cara for the work her and her team have done to put this on today, and also acknowledge our sponsors for the event. These events don't just happen, they occur because people put great work in. So thank you for your attendance. I understand there's still food and coffee outside, so don't feel like you've got to run away. If you want to network and continue with that and sharing those stories, I think that'd be really helpful. So thank you for your attendance this morning, and look forward to seeing you all here next year for the bidding war.